Right, Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. You reached the He Prayed channel. My name is Isaac Mawad. But first and foremost, I want to say call Halayim, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, double honors to the elect apostles and elders of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harachakwadash, which is of Great Millstone, where I learned this truth from and who rule well. Salutations to the Bakiyar, the elect, the 144,000. That's 12,000 men from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel consist of you so-called blacks, Latinos, and indigenous of America. 144,000 being the governing body within the one-third. The rest of the one-third comprises of elect men, women, and children. Shalom to those Israelites scattered due to the diaspora and also the triangular trade. So our people come looking like different ethnicities, having various complexions. So it's not a black thing. We're not the black Hebrew Israelites. We're just Hebrew Israelites. Shalom to those that die in the truth. It says the dead should be raised up first. Those that will be accompanying Yahweh Shah on his return, including our King, King Mashah, who is King David. And as always, it's an honor and privilege, honor and blessing to continue to do this work. The water Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah Ba'ashem Harakak answer my prayers and permitted me to do such. Baba Kashah Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah Ba'ashem Harakak allowed us to be an edifying lesson to at least one member of the Bakiyar. So this video is going to be entitled The Dungeon Feeling, which is when, the persecution comes and they put you into confinement, which is all a test. Now, this is actually the second time that I'm doing this video. The first one was like an hour and 12 minutes. But unfortunately, I had the microphone turned off. So hopefully this video is just as edifying. And it deals with, just being persecuted, which, next video in this short series that I'm doing, which has already been done, I'm going to upload this one first. It's called The Guillotine. So check that one out as well. So let's just get to it. Because there's some of us that have been put in these certain positions where we have to face being locked up for whatever the Most High wanted us to go through. Whether it was in righteousness or in, it just so happened. Because sometimes when you reflect, you look back and it's like, this had to been, the will of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai to put me in this situation. Where the story of the apostles being locked up during 9/11, is spoken about oftentimes to encourage brothers to endure when they find themselves in that situation. And, also the scriptures, when we read about our forefathers, it gives accounts on how they dealt with it and how the Most High rose individuals up against them, to put them in that predicament. And when you're in confinement, it doesn't feel good. That's why I call it the dungeon feeling, because you would have to experience to understand it, right? So let's go to Genesis chapter 39, where it speaks about Yahweh Sop when he was in prison through false accusations. Pharaoh's wife accused him of sexual advances, which there was a difference between the Egyptians and the Israelites. And, according to the laws of the Israelites, adultery is forbidden. And Yahweh Sop, he was falsely accused and placed into a dungeon. But even in those false accusations, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua was with him and delivered him. And Joseph, or Yahweh Sop, he went through hell, man. Especially when you read his story. And that's, some of the hell that some of us went through or go through. And it brings about even more clarity and understanding to what is being said. This is Genesis chapter 39, verse 19. It says, "And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me," falsely accusing him of, doing things sexually, right? Which caused Pharaoh's anger to grow. He became irate. It says, then his wrath was kindled. And so when you go to the word kindle in the etymology, and you also have a tablet called Kindle, which means basically to start. But 12th century Condell, to set fire to start on fire. So his anger was wroth, man. He was mad, and you see that play out in society. They have a term called a crime of passion, man. And I was working for a company in which the owner, I believe he killed his wife. And he went to prison for a while because his wife was cheating on him. So, that spirit is a real thing. Also in the Old Testament, it talks about the spirit of jealousy, where if a man has a spirit on him that his wife trespassed against him, that he would take her to the council, and there will be a process that went along with it. And that's where you get the thyroid, which that thyroid today is basically a cellulite. That's why you see these promiscuous women, and they have that they call dents in their ass. That's formulation that they get, and that's from them allowing different men to skeet in them, like a bee, a female dog. It says, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Yahweh's master took him and put him into the prison. So he took so Pharaoh took Yahweh and put him into prison, right? A place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But Yahweh was with Yahweh. So the Heavenly Father was with him to protect him, to guide him for a purpose, which that purpose was to interpretate a impeding famine that was going to strike that region, which in turn Yahweh was risen to be the Savior and to save his brethren, and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Yahweh's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. So the Most High put the spirit on the keeper of the prison to have favor for Yahweh, man. And sometimes you also see that, if you ever experience being locked up, there will be certain wardens or guards or correctional officers or police that are cool with you. And it's not on a level that, oh, well, I'm just trying to extract information and, try to, gain that individual's trust so I could further put hell on them. But it's a genuine, spirit of being cool with you, right? It says the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, right? So it was so that he wasn't even tripping because he already set Yahweh in that position, to watch out for things. Because Yahweh was with him, and that which he did, Yahweh made it to prosper. So everything that you do that is in righteousness, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua is going to allow it to prosper. Yahweh interprets a dream. This is Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. It says, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Madarzarium, or Mizraim, which the word Egypt is a Greek word, because that region was conquered by Alexander the Great. And later it was given into the hand of, if I'm not mistaken, Ptolemy. Let me make sure. Right, Ptolemaic dynasty. That's where you get an Edomite Cleopatra that, everyone is bugged out over. And I even witnessed it myself when I went to this school trip in college to the African Museum in LA. And the professor was all, bugged out because they depicted Cleopatra as being a so-called white woman, which he didn't even understand the history. That's another point. They don't teach you shit in these schools. It's all, or most of it is all falsehood. Right? So going back to the scriptures, it says, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Madarzarium and his baker, so the butler and the baker got in trouble, had offended their lord, the king of Madarzarium. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them, and this was all set up through the Spirit. So there's a lot of things that are set up in the Spirit to happen. To at the end it will reveal its perfect work. And he put them inward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Yahweh was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Yahweh with them, and he served them. And they continued a season inward, a period of time. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream. The butler and the baker of the king of Martezarium were bound in the prison. And Yahweh came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him inward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Yahweh said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to Yahweh? So certain times you have a dream, and a man of understanding, a seer, will be given the instruction pursuing the Job on what it meaneth. Same thing here with Yahweh. It says, Tell me them, I pray you. And that dream entailed there being a famine, which that saved, not only Martezarium, but also Yahweh brethren, even after they sold him into slavery, man. They casted him out. They were angry. They casted him out and sold him into slavery, man. All because of a dream, right? Yahweh interprets Genesis chapter 41, verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Yahweh, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. So it is true. Certain men of Yahweh Hashem Yahushai have experienced the dungeon and will experience the dungeon in these times. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment. And that's, you have to experience that. As soon as you get home, as soon as you get free, you want to take a shower and get that I don't know if you want to call it a spirit or filth, or, you just want to take a shower and get clean. It says, and came in unto Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said unto Yahweh, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And that dream entailed, as I said, the famine, which I'm not going to read into that because, the video I did was like an hour and some change. So I'm going to try to make this one shorter. Now, dealing with co-pilots, Lashawan Kodash, which really is Lashawan Tahar, which is Lashawan Tahar meaning pure language, Lashawan Kodash meaning holy language or separated language. So I'm going to just skim through some of them. But on your spare time, if you're versed in the Lashawan Tahar, you could go into it yourself. But it says, Bayath, Ha, Sarium, house of bindings, prison, which Yahweh Hashem Shah is going to put certain individuals into these situations. And they may have been in these situations before to help them in, the testing situation. It says, Asar, to bind, tie, imprison. Pattern, falsely accused, thrown into a confined place, yet Yahweh is with him and raises him from the dungeon to rulership. And that's exactly what's going to happen in these times, man. Especially if you endure unto the end. That blade, when it falls, that's you being ushered in to that immortality, into that rulership. But, in this world, they want you to fear death over fearing Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. And this is another seer. I believe that you say his name, Yaramiah. Yaramiah in the dungeon cistern. So this is Jeremiah chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 6. It says, Then they took Yaramiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah, or Malchiah. So, my bad, my had something in the way between the A and the H on my screen, so I read it wrong. It says the son of Hamelech that was in the court of the prison, and they let down Yaramiah with cords. Kind of like in the movie Dark Knight, when they were letting people down into that prison with the cords, with ropes, to prevent them from escaping. It says, in the dungeon there was no water, but mire, which mire could be basically mud, or, it could have been mud mixed with feces, could have had rats in there, could have, could have looked like how they depict in the movies. It says, so Yaramiah sunk in the mire. So it had to have been a deep mud. Now when Ebed-melech the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs which was in the king's house, heard that they had put Yaramiah in the dungeon, the king, then sitting in the gate of Benjamin, Ebed-melech went forth out of the king's house and spake to the king, saying, so the Most High put the spirit on the Ethiopian to petition on behalf of Yaramiah. My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Yaramiah the prophet. So oftentimes in the scriptures, you have evil done unto the true prophets, man. And every time Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua delivers them, and you have to have that in your mind, that, I'm going to be delivered. It says, whom they have cast into the dungeon, and he is like to die for hunger in the place where he is, for there is no more bread in the city. So there was a famine going. It says, then the king commanded Ebed-melech, the Ethiopian, saying, take hence 30 men with thee, and take up Yaramiah the prophet, the seer, out of the dungeon before he die. Right? So Ebed-melech took the men with him and went into the house of the king under the treasury and took thence old cast clouts and old rotten rags and let them down by cords. So they tied all those things together and let him down like a rope into the dungeon, the hole, into the dungeon to Jeremiah, right? It says, and Abimelech the Ethiopian said unto Jeremiah, put these old cast cloths and rotten rags under thy armholes, under the cords. And Jeremiah did so. You know, and it's similar to how, let me get a depiction, hopefully. I want to see the picture where
As a director of finance, I'm managing 15 and 20 contracts a month. With Acrobat AI,
you speed this thing up. Oh, missed it. Kind of like how you got it right there. He has the cords wrapped around him. Let me see. You see how he kind of has the ropes wrapped around him? It's on the show right here. Be lifted up. But in Jeremiah's case, he was pulled up by those 30 men. It says, and Jeremiah did so. So they drew up Jeremiah with cords and took him up out of the dungeon. And Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. You know, so going back to co-pilot, thrown into the bore, bore equals pit, cistern, dungeon. Bore in precepts often links to death, Sheol, and deep depression. Psalms 40 and 2, Psalms 88, 4 and 6. So, this is Yahweh sustains his servant. Psalms chapter 40, verse 1, to the chief musician, the Psalm of David, or Dawadah, or Dawad. I waited patiently for Yahweh. And to be patient means to suffer. And he inclined unto me and heard my cry. Let me see. And Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, he hears the cry of the elect. Let's go straight to the root.
Strong's H 7768. Shavah. Shavah. And second entry, Shua, Shua.
It says to cry out for help, shout. Strong's definitions. An example, freedom from some trouble. And I'm not, or to be free. And I'm not talking about the freedom that Esau pushes. That freedom. Right? So cry for help. Verse 2, it says, he brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. Right? And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our power. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in Yahweh. Blessed is that man that maketh Yahweh his trust, and respecteth not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. And that's how you got to be, man. You want justice. You want Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua to bring justice. And he's going to bring justice, man. Everything done in the dark shall come to light. This is Psalms chapter 88. It says, a petition to be saved from death. Verse 1, a song for the sons of Korah to the chief musician upon Mahalath, Leonath, Mashil of Heman, the Ezrahite. O Yahweh, power my salvation. I have cried day and night before thee. And, even as men of Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua, we often find ourselves in that state. Some actually shedding tears. It says, let my prayer, which is you begging Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua, come before thee. Incline thy ear unto my cry. For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draweth nigh unto the grave. And that's all, right? I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that have no strength, free among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, whom thou rememberest no more, and they are cut off from thy hand. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps. Thy wrath lieth hard upon me, and thou hast afflicted me with all thy waves. Salah. See what that word means. Because I'm also trying to perfect the last video, which was, I believe, a good video, but unfortunately the sound wasn't on, so that happens. Which is figurative of calamities, which could also go into trials and tribulations. And he had to go through that. These men had to go through these things so it could be written in order to strengthen our spirits in these times. So you could have the strength to endure in these days. Going back to Copilot, the word Borgen equals pit, spiritually a place of no footing, no light, no voice. David's pit in dark places as mental, spiritual dungeon. But, believe that he was speaking about Jeremiah, because there's a lot of things because David was a prophet himself, there's a lot of things he spoke about that were actual situations of other prophets. One particularly, his son Solomon, who was going to come back as Yahweh Shai. If you could receive it. This is Psalms 142. And I'll just start at the top. It says, prayer for help in trouble. It says, Mishael of Dawadah, a prayer when he was in the cave, and that was him running from his enemies. You know, which at that time it was a brother that he adored, which was King Saul, man. You know, it says, a prayer when he was in the cave, I cried unto Yahweh with my voice unto Yahweh did I make supplication, which means to beg. Let's get that word. I'll get it in the etymology. Late 14th century, supplication, earnest request, entreaty, a plea, or humble request, right? It says, I poured out my complaint before him. I showed before him my trouble. And you got to pour out your complaint before him, man. He's going to put the spirit on you to do it anyway, man. It says, when my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then thou knewest my path. In the way wherein I walked have they privily laid a snare for me, which was a trap, secretly laid a trap, right? I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul. And you have to actually experience things in this truth to really understand and what is being said. You know, it says, and I made a video, there's no, you can't cite CITE experience. You know, because in these schools, they want you to cite your work. But when it's experience, you know, how could you cite that? How can you make a citation on that? It says, I cried unto thee, O Yahweh, I said, thou art my refuge and my portion in the land of the living. So you got to hold Yahweh as your refuge, as your portion, as your savior, as your sword, as your rock. Even in adversity, even when the world is against you. It says, attend unto my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. And that's the disadvantage that some of us have. Our persecutors are stronger than us. But if Yahweh was with us, who could stand before us? And ultimately, it's if Yahweh Shai is with you. You know, I can't, you know, neglect to give him his glory, especially with all the things that he's done for me. It says, bring my soul out of prison that I may praise thy name. And every time individuals are locked up, they always pray. Well, I could tell you what I do. I'll be praying like a mother effer, man. Baba Kashah, y'all, Bashim, y'all shall let me go home. I just want to do your work. I want to go out. I want to teach. I'll do it 10 times as hard. You know, I'll go harder in the truth. Just let me out this mother effer. You know, so I could praise your name. It says, the righteous shall compass me about, but thou shalt deal bountifully with me, and bountifully through his mercies, right? Going back to Copilot, Masagar, enclosure, prison, soul level confinement, right? And also going to Lamentation, which, you know, Lamentations was also written by Jeremiah, chapter 3, in which he was sharing Israel's affliction too. So, you know, the prophets do go through what the entire nation go through, right? This is Lamentations chapter 3, verse 6. It says, he hath set me in dark places as they that be dead of old. He hath hedged me about, and that I cannot get out, you know, in that confinement. He hath made my chain heavy, which is his burden. Also, when I cry and shout, you know, going back to that definition, he shutteth out my prayer, right? Because, you know, you be praying and you don't get out right away. You don't get delivered. You don't see somebody coming to get you to release you. You know, then a day goes by, then another day goes by, and another day goes by, and it's the same thing. You know, it says, he hath enclosed my ways with hewn stone. He hath made my paths crooked. I'm going to skip that and go back to Copilot. It is not because, you know, I didn't want to read it, just because of the sake of time, man. And it says apocryphal precepts. It says Susanna Daniel, chapter 13, false accusation, elders abusing power. You know, so you have elders, you have accounts of certain men abusing their power. You have accounts of false accusations. It says righteous person trapped in a legal dungeon, right? It says Bel and the dragon, Daniel 14, Daniel thrown into the lion's den again, physical confinement as a stage for Yahweh's deliverance. You know, so if you were in this predicament, you know, just trust in Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua, man. Right? Second Maccabees chapter 6, verse 7, torture and coercion to break covenant. And that's what Esau is going to try to do with his New World Order and his micro implant, is try to get you to turn against the Heavenly Father and accept him as your master. Because it goes back to the all, which is spelled A-U-L, which today is going to be a digital all. It says the body is in their dungeon, but the spirit refuses to bow. Right? And you got to have that spirit on you to not bow down to shit. You know, I always say, fuck this place. And for that matter, you people. You know, you have to have tunnel vision. Right? The dungeon feeling as captivity of mind and nation. You can run, blah, blah, blah. I already read that. It says, teaching point, the dungeon feeling is when Yahweh lets you taste captivity externally or internally for correction and refinement. I'm not going to go into us as a nation. This video is basically concerning individuals, what individuals are going to experience and have experienced in the past. Pursuing the Job chapter 8, verse 8, and I'll go ahead and get that. Because what people don't want you to know is that this is your history book. It's not it's not the so-called white man's book or anybody else's book. This is the history book of you so-called blacks, Latinos, and indigenous. What you like to be called as far as bywords and proverbs. This is Job chapter 8, verse 8. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. So you got to go into the history to understand the former age. It says, for we are but of yesterday. So we are those people in the past and know nothing. And the reason why we don't know anything is because when we're born again, we have to, we have to be educated. The things that we once knew has to be drawn out of us. Because our days upon earth are a shadow. It says, shall not they teach thee and tell thee and utter words out of their heart, which is the mind, right? Can the rush grow up without mire, which is fertilizer? Can the flag grow without water? Whilst it yet is his greenness and not cut down, it withereth before any other herb. So are the paths of all that forget the Most High, and the hypocrite's hope shall perish. So it says modern prison industrial complex detention centers and ghettos are extensions of these curses. Hope in the dungeon. This is Psalms 107, verse 10. It says, such as sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, being bound in affliction and arm, because they rebelled against the words of the Most High and contemned the counsel of the Most High. Therefore he brought down their heart with labor. They fell down and there was none to help. Then they cried unto Yahweh in their trouble, and he saved them out of their distresses. Because we all have gone off. We all went off. We went off as a nation. But even though there's certain men that are going to cry unto Yahweh Bashim Yahushua Bashim Harakwadash because he put the spirit on them to do such. It says he brought them out of the darkness and the shadow of death and break their bands in sunder. Right. And that's, something that you read in the book of Acts, man, concerning Apostle Paul, and that's going to happen in these times. And, certain occasions, men are going to get spiritual powers. They're going to be tearing shit up, man. And that's going to be a testimony to be written for, our children, which is these 2/3 that, or I should say it in the proper way, The elect's children, which are going to be the 2/3 that come back, they're going to read about these feats. And it's not your, your feet. I'm talking about FEATS, feats. It says deliverance of Yahweh and Aparium. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 11, it says, for thee also by the blood of thy covenant, which the blood represents the understanding. The covenant is like an agreement or a contract. I have sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water, no truth. Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. And that's the hopeful elect. They're prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee. When I have bent Yahweh for me, and that's the real way you say Judah is Yahweh, which is Yahweh thanks. And you read about that story dealing with Leah and her sons. It says, filled the bow with Aparium or Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece. The sons of Greece is, the so-called white man who started calling himself white in 1681 due to the Bacon rebellions. Who were the Grecians, which was started by Alexander's dad. I believe his name was Philip, the Edomite. And, they conquered that area until, they even established Rome and stole and took that over. To now you have them here ruling the world through America. It says, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. And Yahweh shall be seen over them, and his arrows shall go forth as the lightning. And Yahweh shall blow the trumpet and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. Because, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua is coming in a chariot. And those arrows, even some being hypersonic, they're going to be, destroying this place. It says the dungeon's filling is not the end, it's a stage before deliverance and judgment of the oppressor. Now, this is just going to be a lot of information. I'm going to skip through a lot of it, though, dealing with torture and all that other stuff. It says modern confinement, martial law and disasters, martial law and emergency confinement. It says martial law in modern states is usually framed as temporary rule by military or emergency powers, curfews, movement restrictions, and sometimes preventative detention. Even under emergencies, international human rights law, ICCPR, UDHR, and UN standards say detention must remain lawful, necessary, and non-torturous. But as you see right now in real time, they don't care about international law. I subscribe to this individual named Big Herc 916, and I watch his interviews. And one interviewee he had on his channel was an individual name, or that goes by Badger. And, he was talking about how he was locked up in 9/11 in a particular prison in California. I forget what state he was in, assuming California. And he was talking about how they were getting ready to exterminate them all, until, the last minute they backed off. But it says prison populations during disasters, reality, incarcerated people are highly vulnerable in disasters. hurricanes, floods, wildfires, pandemics, because they cannot self-evacuate or secure food, water, or medical care. Legal baseline, the Eighth Amendment requires prison officials to avoid cruel and unusual punishment, which courts interpret to include deliberate indifference to serious risk, extreme heat, lack of water, fire safety, etc. There is no lawful extermination protocol for killing or abandoning prisoners during disasters, which it wasn't necessarily a disaster concerning 9/11. It was more of a terrorist attack type of deal, which I didn't want to go ahead and try to find when he said it. You know, who knows where if that video is at. So, you know, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna skip a lot of this. Solitary confinement in the dungeon today. Modern solitary confinement often means 22 to 24 hours per day in a small cell, minimal human contact, and sensory deprivation. The UN Mandela rules, which, you know, the United States has already disregarded the UN and all these other different national or international ruling bodies. It says, classify prolonged solitary confinement more than 15 days as a form of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment and say it should be prohibited. In the U.S., tens of thousands have been held in such conditions. Many states are only now starting to limit duration and conditions. You know, spiritually, this is a direct modern echo of the bore and dark places language, engineered isolation that breaks people down. Ancient torture versus modern practices. Ancient methods, biblical, Near Eastern, Greco-Roman. This is what Esau does. Beating, scourging, stocks, dungeons, starvation, exposure, mutilation, crucifixion, and public execution. Goal, pain, terror, and public example to maintain imperial control. Right? Let me skim through some of this. Now, if you've been in this truth for a while, you might have seen that video circulating when they were constructing those different detention centers and how someone pointed out, a whistleblower, that there were ways to, I think the word is emit gas, toxic gases into those cells to kill the occupants. Which, you know, in these times they'll say it's a conspiracy theory. But it says FEMA camps, modern concentration camps, and gas device speculation. FEMA camp blueprints and extermination claims are a long-running conspiracy narrative. There is no evidence of an official U.S. program to build extermination camps or retrofit emergency facilities with gas chambers. FEMA's documented role is emergency management, disaster response, temporary housing, logistics, not running death camps. You know, but that's the same thing that they said in the Third Reich, which was Nazi Germany. Next question is, if international law says torture, arbitrary detention, and inhumane treatment was illegal, how can governments still get away with it, especially when officials have immunity? And how does that shape the conspiracy narrative? It says international law is only as strong as enforcement. So who's going to enforce what a nuclear power does, man? So that gives way for these devils to do whatever the hell they want to do. And really, they're doing what Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai wants them to do. And that's part of the testing, right? It says immunity changes the entire power dynamic. I'll skip that. Skip. So this question I had right here, I said, yes, certain actors on the world stage have a knack for violating international laws, especially through history. How would the United States get away with what Nazi Germany did? It's because they're a nuclear power, man. That's the only reason why Germany didn't secede, and also because of prophecy. But we're in the Fourth Reich. We're in the extension of that system. That's why you have something called Project Paperclip, where a lot of those Germans came to the United States and the others went to the Soviet Union. So the question is, so could the U.S. get away with what Nazi Germany did? And AI says no, but I'm going to say yes, because who's going to stop them? Only one that's going to be able to stop them is Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai. So I said, so if figures like Trump inject prospects of wiping out a whole civilization, how does law affect his actions from doing so? Also, considering the war on immigration and the reports of ICE officials committing atrocities against individuals they deem not to be naturalized citizens. It says a president cannot legally wipe out a civilization, even if a leader talks like that. The law, the military chain of command, and international treaties create hard barriers. And you see, it says the military is legally obligated to refuse unlawful orders. Well, the whole attack on Iran was unlawful because they needed permission from Congress to go to war. ICE and immigration enforcement, what's actually happening. You mentioned ICE officials committing atrocities against people they deem not naturalized. Let's break that down carefully. ICE has been documented to commit abuses. Multiple human rights organizations have reported excessive force, medical neglect, sexual abuse, family separation, coercive tactics, retaliation against detainees. These are documented, not conspiracy, which those ICE agents aren't nothing but that same force that you saw in the Purge movie, man. Why accountability is difficult. This ties back to your earlier question about immunity. ICE operates in high secrecy environments, legally gray zones, facilities with limited oversight, contracted private prisons, remote locations. Combined with qualified immunity, lack of transparency, weak internal discipline, political protection, and abuses can occur without immediate consequences. But it says, but ICE cannot legally exterminate or eliminate populations, which when you set up a situation like they're trying to set up and implement, anything goes. And hey, I ran a list. Let me see if I still got it somewhere. No, I got it. set up a list where it listed all or the amount of people that Esau has murdered, man, and it's in the millions. Since 2003, the war on terror murdered 4.7 million people, man. So this guy, he doesn't hate blood. He doesn't care what happens to you. Says, if that is correct, wouldn't it be unlawful to start a war without the authorization of Congress? It says, yes, starting a war without Congress is unlawful under U.S. constitutional and statutory law, but the reality is more complicated because presidents have repeatedly pushed the boundaries of that law. What the law actually says under the Constitution, Congress alone has the power to declare war. This is explicit in Article 1, Section 8. The president is commander-in-chief, but that rule does not include the power to initiate war on his own. But we already seen that being violated. Says, even if the Constitution is suspended in its martial law, even under martial law, the Constitution is not suspended. But what I said in the last video, the Constitution has been suspended ever since they instituted the Patriot Act. Let me see. I just want to ask a few questions. So they're going to say no, which is probably just deception. It says, no, the Patriot Act did not suspend the Constitution secretly or openly, but it did expand government surveillance powers in ways that many critics argue strain constitutional protections, especially the Fourth Amendment. Why people think it suspended the Constitution? Because several parts of the Patriot Act reduced judicial oversight, lowered the threshold for surveillance, increased secrecy, expanded executive branch power, allowed broad interpretation by intelligence agencies. This created the feeling of constitutional suspension, especially around Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, First Amendment, freedom of association, due process, but legally the Constitution remained full force. Oh man, just give me a minute. I'm trying to remember this organization that Trump is hold on, let me just keep it simple. But you always got to take the certain information that AI says with a grain of salt. It says, I'll probably have to do a separate video on going into these Noahide laws. I did a video a long time ago before that went into it and how it can call for you to be put to death. But let me go to the next section of the video. It says history on concentration camps. Concentration camps are facilities where large groups of people, often political prisoners or targeted ethnic groups, are detained without trial, typically under harsh conditions. They have been used throughout history for various purposes, including forced labor and imprisonment, with notable examples during the Nazi regime in World War II. So one of the great examples was the non-nuclear Nazi Germany, even though they're the ones that came with the nuclear bomb. And now they also are back in power in the Fourth Reich, which is the United States. And now they have the nuclear bomb, so they could pretty much do whatever the hell they want. And who's going to stop them? Other than Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua. I'm going to skip a lot of this because I felt like it was kind of unnecessary in the last video. But it says 20th century systems, 1914 to 1918, World War I era civilian internment camps across Europe, extensive use of internment exchange camps, 1918 through 1991 Soviet Gulag system, large-scale political imprisonment and forced labor, 1933 onward Nazi concentration camps. Dachau opened March 1933, expanded into a vast system including extermination camps during World War II. Post-1945, democracies and authoritarian states continued using internment concentration-style camps in colonial conflicts and dictatorships. Example given: British Kenya 1950s, Japanese American internment in the U.S. 1942 through 45, Pinochet's Chile, and more recent examples of mass detention. Summary: the practice predates the 20th century. The modern concept and the term concentration camp derived from 19th century colonial and wartime re-concentration policies, notably Spanish Cuba, and were developed and expanded by various states: British, German, U.S., Soviet, Nazi, and these are all Edomites, into larger systemic forms in the 20th century. So it's another article I had queued up. Let me see how much juice I got real quick. 24. This is from newworldorderinfo.com. It says leaked U.S. Army document outlines plan for re-education camps in America. It says a leaked U.S. Army document prepared for the Department of Defense contains shocking plans for political activists to be pacified by PSYOP officers in developing an appreciation of U.S. policies while detained in prison camps inside the United States. So they already have these in the books. The document entitled FN 3-39.40 Internment and Resettlement Operations was originally released on a restricted basis to the DoD in February 2010, but has now been leaked online. The manual outlines policies for processing detainees into internment camps both globally and inside the United States. International agencies like the UN and the Red Cross are named as partners, in addition to domestic federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. The document makes it clear that the policies apply within U.S. territory and involve DoD support to the U.S. civil authorities for domestic emergencies and for designated law enforcement and other activities, including man-made disasters, accidents, terrorist attacks, and incidents in the U.S. and its territories. The manual states these operations may be performed as domestic civil support operations and adds that the authority to approve resettlement such operations within U.S. territories will require a special exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, which can be obtained via the president invoking his executive authority. The document also makes reference to identifying detainees using their social security number. Aside from enemy combatants and other classification of detainees, the manual includes the designation of civilian internees. In other words, citizens who are detained for security reasons, for protection, or because he or she committed an offense against the detaining power. Which that's what they're doing now with ICE. Then you also have Rex 84, short for Readiness Exercise 1984, was established under the pretext of mass exodus or illegal aliens crossing the Mexican-U.S. border, the same pretense used in the language of the KBR request for services. And that's something that they did with the presidencies of Barack Hussein Obama and Joseph Biden, allowing, a lot of people to come into America just to create this scenario. I'm gonna try to keep it fast. This is couriernewsroom.com. Map all 23 industrial warehouses ICE wants to turn into detention death camps. It says plans are underway to double the detention capacity of the Trump administration's federal police force by converting massive industrial warehouses unsuitable for people to live in into detention centers. Courier has independently verified the location of 23 mass detention campsites that have been surveyed by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Of those locations, leases for 5 have been secured, while opposition from local communities has killed or stalled deals at 5 others. In an apparent attempt to avoid public outcry and scrutiny, ICE has sought to secure these leases in private, ignoring potential health and safety violations and catching local elected officials off guard. In an effort to provide transparency into this process, we have published a searchable map showing each proposed site, its current status, and the level of public response. All 23 locations can be found here. So this is the locations, which if you remember, if you were in the truth a long, long time ago, there was a secret website that was associated with FEMA that showed a disaster map. And I believe it showed things that were going to transpire in certain areas in the country. I believe it was during the time of the Obama administration, where, you also heard that he had purchased coffins that were able to hold at least 20 people or 20 bodies, cadavers, in Atlanta. So it makes sense if you remember that map, because California was flooded. There was like a disaster here, and most of this section of the United States was operating. But they do have these camps, and why wouldn't they deny it? Also, from commondreams.org, I'm just going to read the title. It's the same thing we just read. Trump's concentration camp build-out includes nearly $40 billion for warehouse conversions. So these white people are trying to exterminate you. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it on this lesson. I hope you check out the guillotine video, and I'm gonna add to this series. Y'all was shy by the end of the week. I'm still, according to my own planning, so I wanted to take a couple days off and just, fast and pray and reflect. So I didn't go to camp on Sunday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I have 3 more videos to do. I already have the idea for them and everything. So I hope you check them out. If not, I hope you check out another brother that is teaching in the doctrine of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, which was given to Great Millstone. So with that, I hope you have a good Shabbat and Shalom.